Thank you for inviting me to moderate this panel, and thank you to our panelists who come from the public, private, and nonprofit sectors that are with us. So let me read you their bios. We have with us, just to my right, Heather Repenning. She is the Executive Officer for Sustainability Policy at LA Metro, our public transportation authority that provides the almost 10 million people in LA County with bus, rail, and other mobility services. At Metro, Heather helps guide policies and programs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve air quality, and increase climate resilience for local communities, including the agency Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, vehicle miles traveled, reduction targets, zero-emission bus program, tree policy, and heat mitigation efforts. Previously, she has served as Vice Chair for Climate Action of the Board of Directors of Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and as Vice President of the City of LA Board of Public Works. Very glad to have you with us. Next to her is Jeral Poskey. He is the CEO and founder of Swyft Cities, a Google spin-off transforming cities and real estate with modular, cost-effective transit using whoosh, autonomous electric vehicles on elevated networks of fixed cables and rails. Jeral was formerly a project executive for transportation planning at Google's real estate division and led Google's Project Swyft. He holds a US patent for electronic ticketing for advanced transit systems and assisted the Transportation Research Board in reviewing technical papers on transportation demand management. Okay. And last but not least, we have Eli Lipmen, who joined the MoveLA staff in 2017 after working on the successful Measure M campaign. He was appointed Executive Director in 2022, having previously served on the leadership board for over 6 years. Eli has dedicated his life to social change, from hunger to human rights, to climate change to affordable housing. As a board member of the nonprofit Climate Plan and co-chair of the South LA Transit Empowerment Zone Transit Work Group, he is leading efforts in Los Angeles and across California to create more equitable public transportation.
And my co-chair happens to be Heather.
Fantastic. And I'm getting a lot of emails from you. As one of 5 proponents of Measure ULA.
Come to our conference.
Eli led the campaign for funding for affordable housing and tenant protections in the city of LA. He led MoveLA's campaign to successfully make LA Metro's Go Pass program permanent. He was honored by the Transit Center for organizing national advocacy to achieve a more equitable bipartisan infrastructure law. He's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, USC's Annenberg School of Communication, London School of Economics, and the Coro Lead Southern California Fellowship Program.
But so don't worry, my kids actually go to school right over there. So if you hear screams, that's probably my kids. Okay. So I have a UCLA background as well. So.
Wonderful. So let me start with a question, a short question that I would like each one of you to maybe give a short answer. So let's start with Heather. Heather, in your view, and I'm going to ask the same question to all of you, what is a sustainable transportation system? What are its elements? How should it look?
Well, first of all, sustainable transportation is shared transportation. So reliance on single occupancy vehicles is not sustainable. And so I work for LA Metro. We provide up to 1 million rides a day on our trains and buses. And that is ultimately sustainable. We've been looking at our numbers related to our goals for reducing the use of single occupancy vehicles. And what we find is that we can achieve a very large emissions reduction, climate emissions, and also particulate matter that's causing harm to local communities. So I would say, first of all, it looks like rail and buses. A lot of times people from other places come to LA and say, why don't we have a good public transit system here in LA? The answer is partly We do have
my next question, but
okay. Fine. Well, we do have one, and it's called our bus system. So I think someone told me today that did you take the bus? Okay, so you can actually use the bus. I know it doesn't look like a cool metro system like a lot of other cool cities have. It's very sustainable. Our bus system is very sustainable. It also looks like the vehicles that we do have should be zero or near zero emission and using clean and sustainable fuels.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jeral, what do you have to add?
So
Agree, disagree?
what does it look like as a sustainable? Well, there's a little shot across the bow, but I'll leave that.
That wasn't intentional.
The answer is a sustainable transportation system is only half of a transportation story. The other half is land use. So the two are intertwined. So the sustainable transportation system has to match and be appropriate for the land uses there. Mm-hmm. And if you don't solve the two together, I think what our company is focused on is a mid-density, that if you have large vehicles like metro and trains, that gets you the downtown skyscrapers. When you have buses, it serves a spread out area. The mid-density, we don't have enough of. So the most sustainable level of development is mid-density. And it's just this in-between pattern where buses aren't providing the capacity or service, but it's not dense enough to warrant new train service. And so our job is to fill in this gap that exists in the mass transit world with the right transportation for the right level of land use.
Okay, we'll find out more later about that. Eli, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would 100% agree. There's a fascinating study that was done in Australia, and they were looking at what gets people to change their behavior, right, and start using more sustainable transportation. And what they found is you need 4 or more alternatives to the private automobile, right? And so once you hit that, you start to see that increase in usage of alternatives go up dramatically. And so that really kind of informs the work that we're doing, is like, how do we create enough density of alternatives to the single passenger vehicle so that people can make that switch? You know, it's going to be a combination of electrifying, all of our vehicles, right, our single passenger vehicles, so we can have more sustainable transportation. But it's also going to be getting people out of their cars. Anybody here read the CARB scoping plan? No takers? No takers?
Yeah. I did.
You did? You did? A couple. Can anyone take a guess? So, we obviously have this mandate by the governor, an executive order to sell only zero-emission vehicles by 2035, right? But that's only going to account for a certain amount of our reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. How much do you think we have to reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled on average per person in California by 2030? Take a guess. 27%? Who said that? See, there's my board member, Alan. He pays attention. It's actually about 25% by 2030, which seems super daunting, right? Whoa, how are we all going to individually, every single person, children included, going to shift our VMT? But if you think about it, and you think of campaigns like, Meatless Mondays, what we're really saying is we just want you to keep your car at home for one day, or we want you to displace maybe one of your trips per day. And that seems a little bit more reasonable, right? That seems doable if you can find the transportation resources. Another interesting fact, there's been some study done, really good stuff on behavior change at Duke, about how we kind of get people to change their behavior and become more sustainable in their transportation. And by the way, transportation accounts for 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. By far, it is the 800-pound gorilla. And if you include refining in the state of California, it's almost 50%. That's huge, right? But this study by Duke found that travel behavior is very sticky. It's not addictive, but it's sticky. So you have to change something else. Marriage, divorce, changing jobs, changing your home, right, where you are, to kind of rethink your travel patterns. So if we can really focus on those kind of individuals and those people at that point of inflection, the data shows that we'll have more of a chance to change behavior and lead to a more sustainable transportation system.
Thank you. I fully agree that, behavior and behavior perceptions, right or wrong, are very important. So coming back to Heather, I want to ask the following. Public transit in Los Angeles, right or wrong, is perceived by a lot of people as, the mode of last resort, which is not true for many other parts of the world. So how what is Metro? How are you working to change this impression? How can we change this impression? What needs to happen?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of work happening at Metro, and we are actually a $9 billion agency. We have a great amount of funding, largely due to the voters of Los Angeles County voting again and again to assess themselves a sales tax. So we have sales tax funding for every dollar that's spent here in LA County. A small bit of it goes to LA Metro because there is general agreement among all stakeholders that we need better public transportation. And so we are in the process of doing that. The first thing is our capital program, which is kind of what people mostly know. You know, they see, especially here at UCLA, we're building the Purple Line. We recently completed the regional connector, which tunnels through the absolute oldest and most dense part of underneath downtown. It's actually a real feat of engineering. We opened that last year. We opened the K line. We're about to open the airport connector, which is going to allow people, once the airport opens their people mover, to come out of the terminal, jump on the people mover, and connect to Metro's station, the gateway to all of Metro's system. It's actually going to be a really big change for people who travel by air. But we are also working to improve our service and make sure that our buses and trains run frequently and on time, and that they are safe and clean. There's been a lot of investment in safety in particular over the last couple of years coming out of the pandemic. We know there were some issues, and so because we lost a lot of our riders, and so we've invested in programs like our ambassador program, which is a huge investment for us to provide not armed security everywhere, but uniformed security, folks who are helping guide people. We have a uniform presence throughout all of our stations and on a lot of our buses, and making sure that our system is also clean. So there are a lot of investments being made. We know in many ways we can do better, but I also wouldn't doubt the million people that are riding our system every day. Right. So sometimes opinions are formed by people that actually aren't taking Metro, which isn't completely fair. So if you haven't taken Metro recently, give us a try, please.
So, Jeral, you mentioned a very important aspect of coordinating land use and transportation, and that certain modes are much more relevant for, high-intensity land uses. And actually, to that extent, I think that the fact that we will finally have mass transit coming to the Los Angeles airport or to UCLA, it is very important because it's quite unheard of that these land uses that bring so many people. But going back to your concept of medium uses, and can you talk a little bit about how new transportation technologies that in some ways you represent can meet the sustainable transit and sustainable city goals?
Yes, and I think we have to look at another partial answer to the first question too is, I'm not trying to picture the world we have today, but the world that's coming, and there's parts of this that we can't do anything about. I think autonomous vehicles are coming, EV2Ls or flying cars. They're here. They're not really getting mowed any significant numbers, but when those numbers change, I'll go off on on AVs for a second. I'll say an incredible boost in safety, an incredible boost in the mobility given to people who are elderly or teenage or disabled. But you're going to see that with a substantial increase in miles traveled, which means congestion going through the roof. You're going to see overall energy consumption up. So you first have to say that's the future we're getting into. Right. So now, how do we respond to that future? Not what exists today, but what's coming. And you're going to have to offer an experience that you don't have to actually meet it one for one. But our level of providing service is going to have to go up as the other options get better. Our public transit options have to get better. I think that only half answered your question, but I think that's the most important takeaway, is that a sustainable transportation in the future has to not just be sustainable in and of itself, but it has to be offsetting some of the potentially negative modes that are going to be out there. So it's going to be a battle, and I think we have to be all progressive with policy, progressive with technology adoption, and progressive with flexibility, because we just can't predict everything.
So I have a little bit of a different vision for Los Angeles. You know, we went to voters in 2008 and 2016 and say, hey, don't you want to get rid of soul-crushing traffic? Because, right, it is soul-crushing. And so they actually voted to tax themselves. 68% of voters in Los Angeles County. I mean, it's kind of insane when you think about the title of this panel, the automobile city, right? That we went out and did that. And, you know, I see a multimodal future. You know, I have a question for you. Who has more rail? New York City today or Los Angeles in 1920? Anyone want to take a guess? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Los Angeles, 1920. Well, guess what? You get to ride Metro for free today. You got one of our cool SoCal Transit Week.
You can bring prizes.
There's one ride on that, so you can check out Metro. Now here, I got prizes. Yeah. So here's another question for you. Who has the second highest? So that was yesterday, right? At those times, right? Everybody was taking public transportation in Los Angeles. It was safe. It wasn't very fast, but it got you to your destination. Let's fast forward to 2025, or 2024, actually. Who has the second highest ridership in the country? Anyone want to take a guess? Raise your hand. There we go. No, they're number one.
Second highest.
Second highest. Nope. That's correct. Woo! As Heather said, we have 1 million daily riders. We're the second largest transportation by ridership in the country. We eclipsed the Bay Area and Chicago during the pandemic, and we continue to increase that. But I think we need 2 million riders every day, right? If we're going to have a really, if we're going to get rid of soul-crushing traffic. And I think it's going to be building bigger, better projects, which we're doing. We have the largest public infrastructure project in the entire country, $120 billion over 40 years. But we need to just provide better, safer, more usable service. One of the things that we've really invested in is the student transit, right? And I know here at UCLA, a year and a half ago, students actually voted to sort of tax themselves to have free student transit. And why do we think that's significant? I see my friends up in the corner looking at their phones and their computers who run an incredible transportation system here. And now you have all these students with free transit. Why is that important? Because students, for the most part, can't afford gas, insurance, and a car, right? And so if they have a free card and they can ride it, they're going to take that, right? They don't have a lot of extra income. And that actually, just in the same way that you get free 6 months of Apple Plus when you get your new Apple Watch, right? We're giving them this benefit, this opportunity to ride transit, check it out, go with their friends, because this is the reality. What's more safer when you're stuck at a transit station at night, the light's flickering, the bus isn't coming, or there's a dozen students standing with you and you're all having a joke and having a good time? You're going to take transit together. So if we can get students onto transit here in Los Angeles, we can start to change what I think is we've lost 2 generations here in LA, right? Like they grew up with the idea that you had, a home with a 2-car garage and you commuted to work. That's what they were told they needed to do. And so if we can create a new generation, we can go down a different path. That's one that will have more public transportation and sustainable transportation.
Going back to Heather, we know all the transit systems in the US and all over the world got quite a hit because of COVID. I mean, and we now seem to have forgotten COVID. And actually, I commute every day from Pasadena. I have an electric car, but there is no good way for me to come from Pasadena to UCLA without spending 2 or 3 hours. So that's one thing. But what I see is that the traffic is worse than ever. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a bit how has Metro regained its transit ridership? We are
COVID? Officially back to where we were before the pandemic. So before our ridership was increasing, and then pandemic boom, essential riders only. And we actually we retained a larger portion of our ridership than a lot of other cities like Washington, D.C. and New York, because a lot of our riders are essential workers. A lot of the other systems have more, let's say, of the kinds of workers that were able to work from home. And so we retained a larger portion, so that made it a little bit easier for us to come back from. But we are officially back. And because we are funded in large part by sales tax, our agency didn't take the kind of hit that it did in New York. New York, took a very big hit because they lost their fare box revenue, which is a big portion of their revenue.
And the Bay Area too.
If you're watching now what's happening in New York, what's been happening over the last 6 months with congestion pricing. If you're interested in transportation policy and sustainability, you have to keep your eye on congestion pricing. Our habits are largely also economic habits, right? We are acting based on economics, whether we reflect on that or not. The cost of driving, the cost of gasoline, the cost of parking versus, and rest in power, Donald Shoup, in comparison to the cost of transit. These are all things that people think about when they're deciding how they're going to get to and from work and home. So New York has put in a congestion pricing system, so people now have to pay a decent amount of money coming in and out of Manhattan. It was very much politicized. The governor stopped it, and now they started it, and now I don't want to even. But they actually need that money. They need the money to provide the upkeep and maintenance of their transit system. But they also, it's a way to incentivize people to shift from car to the public transit. No one, it's hard policy to implement for politicians, because it's not that popular to raise prices on something like driving. Yeah. But ultimately, in order to really create the kind of mode shift that Eli is talking about, where we have 2 million riders, I do think that those economic questions and ultimately pricing, the cost of driving and the cost of using our road will be a consideration in the future.
Thank you.
I would just add, I got some really interesting intel yesterday about that congestion pricing program in New York, and it may be here to stay despite what our president wants to do. And that's because Moody's and all of the other rating agencies, and this gets to all you folks who are MBA students, are basically like, we will downgrade the city of New York if you lose this revenue source, right? Because your transportation system's going to collapse. So it may actually stick because of that, which is kind of an interesting development. But I agree with you. We're going to have to. I mean, we have one of the most affordable systems in the country. It's $1.75, and even though we support, fare-free student transit, making it completely free for everyone isn't going to get you out of your car from Pasadena, because it's a lot more convenient, right? We need more frequent service, and we're going to need congestion pricing to kind of bring in those externalities and really make it clear to the rider. So they're looking at that for the downtown area and for the west side. So it's going to be a lot more expensive potentially in the future for you to come to UCLA.
Let me ask then about that, because all my transportation planning colleagues, Donald, one of them that we lost very recently, are big proponents of congestion pricing, but we know that it's politically difficult. So how do you balance, and that's for everybody, and maybe you can respond since you are in the public sector, how do you balance transit goals with political and resource constraints?
I think that I'm agency staff, so we report to our CEO, who reports to a board. It's one of the most political boards anywhere. It has everyone from every single member of the board of county supervisors, to the mayor of LA, to the mayor of Inglewood, to 2 or 3 city council members. So, they're all basically elected officials, and they're ultimately going to decide how to do that. We can make recommendations about what we think is good policy. Yeah. Luckily, I don't have to decide to implement congestion pricing.
That's where the issue is. Jeral, I want to ask you to help us dream a little bit and talk about new technologies and what they can offer for a sustainable transportation system.
Yeah, I think I've already highlighted that not all new technologies are going to be sustainable, but where we can take advantage of it. Can you elaborate a bit? Yeah, I think as we saw briefly, my company, those are small vehicles operating on demand. I'll counteract what you said earlier. The most efficient transportation is a single occupancy vehicle. The bicycle is the most efficient mode. So you have to start there and say, what is the minimum amount of embodied carbon and operational, don't forget the embodied, in building systems that it takes to move a passenger mile.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we're doing is focusing not on the long haul commutes. I think, especially in LA, but it's really everywhere, people really fixate on getting the 20-mile commute from home into the city. That's, I don't know the LA numbers, most places it's gonna be low teens. It could be as high as 20% of trips in the LA area, but that's still not 80% of the trips. And focusing on the reality, like what do people really need to move? They typically need to move 5 miles or less. That's most of the trips in an urban area.
It's about 50% here in LA.
Yeah, it should be 50. And so are you solving that problem? So we have a solution that moves people short distances. We connect people from a metro station, say, the 1, 2, 3 miles that it's just too hard to get. So you build those transit-oriented development, but instead of that being a pretty small circle around a metro station, now we can enlarge that circle. So you're thinking through as a system. People have tried a lot with autonomous vehicles to fill last mile connectivity. Nobody's mastered it yet. I think it still deserves trying. I think people are still trying, but they're also being very careful in trying, which is logical because nothing's really proven success yet. And then, dialing it in. I think there's cities who are more willing to try new things and are more appropriate to try new things. If your city is like at the breaking point, I had an interesting conversation with a city, an equivalent to LA Metro elsewhere, and they first thought we were going to be pulling people away from their trains. They're like, we're at a fiscal crisis, we can't lose any riders. We said, no, we're trying to actually give you riders. We're trying to help feed into the transit stations. And she said, literally, well, we lose money on every rider. If you give us more riders, it just makes it worse. So like, okay, you're in a mindset where more riders are bad, less riders are bad. They're stuck. And it's not the time to try new technology. If you're in that situation where you're just in a corner, that's not the place. Other places we're talking to, under contract with two cities in this area. And they're at a place where they can try something new. They're at an inflection point. Their future is going to be different than the past. They know if they don't do anything, but these are more the sprawling areas that never planned for transit. Like bus service is just never going to be effective. They never left room for trains, and they're stuck. And so they're at an inflection point where they can take the lead. I think it's finding the right place to experiment at the right time. LA Metro has a great innovation office. So certainly the right experiments will happen in LA Metro. I know this is, you don't exactly say LA, but I think we're supposed to limit our topics to the city of Los Angeles. But I think of greater LA, just finding the right solution, the right place to be bold at the right time.
Yes. Eli, tell us a little bit about this. I mean, the first last mile connections are particularly important in a city that is so, such an urban sprawl like Los Angeles. And not everybody can bike. We're having people over 65 are the fastest growing segment of the population. Not everybody can walk. So how do you connect people to the shared modes of transportation if they live 1 mile away? What are some ideas?
Right. Well, and just to kind of make a finer point on the work that you really do, thinking about where people live, right? I mean, we sort of had this policy of development where you sort of build communities farther and farther out, and then you drive until you can afford, and then you have to drive back into work. Well, that no longer works anymore. We need more, medium and higher density. But I think another sort of argument for what you're working on is the public safety issue. A lot of people don't want to bike or walk because it's just freaking dangerous on our streets here, right? We had more people die in traffic fatalities in 2023 and 2024 than homicides. Now, if you were a politician and all of a sudden you had a rash of homicides, people would be calling for your head. We need more cops, we need more cops. People don't seem to be calling for that with traffic fatalities, but we have really dangerous streets. Now, we helped to pass a ballot measure last year, Measure HLA, that's supposed to implement the mobility plan and make it faster and make it safer for people to go. We supported the students when they had their contract negotiations here, and one of their biggest demands was we want more bike lanes, we want more e-bike incentives, right? And we were like, hey, we're all for that. But for some people, like having something that is off the road that's completely safe, where they don't have to have a conflict with a car, is the way to go. I think what really we're seeing is that people need like a network. There was some research that was done that showed that a lot of these accidents are concentrated where the bike lane ends. Duh, right? Because they're having a conflict with the car. So we have an idea called the Festival Trail. Go to festivaltrail.org, which is basically taking existing infrastructure and making it seamless. So you can go from all the way from LAX to downtown without ever having to see or be in a car, and then out to the San Fernando Valley and to the Rose Bowl and down to Long Beach, using existing projects that are either built, in construction, or planned and just need to be engineered and constructed. And with this, like, we can reorient the way that we think about our city and even add like aerial transit to those right-of-ways, right? Because you can get faster on something. Like if you don't have the ability to walk or bike, right? You have alternatives, and those are publicly owned right-of-ways. I think this is a huge opportunity for not only Angelenos to say, hey, we can be different here, but for the world to see us not as a place that's just Hollywood, palm trees, and traffic. We can get rid of the last two.
So there are two questions that I want to ask all of you, and I'll start with Heather. Los Angeles is expecting a number of mega events, and preparations have started. And of course, we have the fires, and a lot of attention, rightly so, went into recovery. But can you tell me a little bit about tell us about how Metro is thinking about moving people throughout these mega events?
It's called the bus. No, we are putting a lot of work, and actually our Office of Strategic Innovation is leading Metro's work on preparing for the Olympic Games. We have something called the Mobility Concept Plan, there's another thing called the Games Route Network. So it's basically the plan to get people around to and from all the major venues. There's been talk, is this a car-free games? Is this not car? We're thinking that people really should not try to drive during the Olympic Games in Los Angeles. If you live here, if you don't live here, just take the bus. I didn't live here back then, but apparently during the '84 Olympics, a lot of people actually didn't drive, and they knew it was not going to be a good time to drive around, and so they made alternate plans. We can do this. And so we're planning to have, in addition to our normal fleet of 2,000 buses, another, let's say, 2,000 buses on top of that to move people around. And so, there's not going to be parking at these venues, and it's not for sustainability reasons. I wish it were, but it's because of security. So people are not going. If you have tickets to a sport, you're not going to be able to drive and go park and see it. The parking lots are going to be closed off. So we're going to have people on buses. There are going to be designated routes. There's going to be a lot of other work to try to do the kinds of things that Eli is talking about, that are more community-based planning and, leaving a legacy maybe of more trees or better shade for bus riders and things like that we can hope for. But the core of what we're trying to do is to map out a way to get people around using buses.
Okay. Jeral, what are your thoughts about how should the city best accommodate mobility during mega events?
Well, and I will build on that and say, I mentioned an inflection point earlier, so I'll use the maxim: don't let a good crisis go to waste. There's a short amount of time, but what you're talking about can really deliver ridership, and if we can make those habits stick, I think it's going to be. So a short story about when I was managing transportation at Google. We had 30% of the people coming via bus. And this is in suburban sprawl, Mountain View, California. That's just an absolutely unheard of number. And the key was buses made 3 stops at pickup and 5 stops at drop off. Yeah. So there's basically direct service. You could be 25 miles away. I literally have a bus route that I could take that has 65 stops. It doesn't make all the stops generally, but it has that many stops between me and downtown San Jose. These were basically express buses every time, and people will adopt when the service is right. And 100%. So if any of that can stay, that's just my hope, is not to worry about the Olympics, which is just a couple of weeks, plus the Paralympics. Yeah. But what can you make stick? And I am praying for you, wishing for you, hoping for you that some of those changes stay. That these changes stay permanent.
And I was in Mexico City in October, and I took their new cable car system. It's the longest one in the world, and it's fantastic. And you know how long it took them to build it? 18 months, right? So like solutions like this could easily be done, before the Olympics, if we were to invest in them and you have to overcome all the planning issues. I think we have to realize how big these mega events are. So does anyone, I've got more of these. So we're having the Super Bowl, right, in 2027 and the World Cup in 2026. But, how many times bigger do you think the Olympics are compared to the Super Bowl? How many Super Bowls? Anyone? Close. A little bit lower. 17? No, lower than 10. 7, yes, that's right. Did I give you one already? No, you want another one? Yeah. You got it now. All right, so it's 7x. So it's either 7 Super Bowls or 7 Taylor Swift concerts if you're into Taylor Swift. So you have to think about that. We have 15 events that are going to happen from Crypto.com to USC Expo Park. There's going to be 1 million people every day walking between those venues. We're not going to have room for cars. We're going to have to really shut down streets, and this creates this really great opportunity for us. So that's why we've come up with this idea of the festival trail, which is temporary and permanent pedestrianizing public spaces, also celebration spaces, right? Because we want places we're not all going to be able to afford a $1,000 ticket to the opening ceremonies. I wish we could, but we're not. So you're going to want to be here at UCLA with a big screen watching all the athletes with all your friends, and a couple of food carts, right? That would be a lot of fun. So we want to create those spaces for that. I do have a lot of concerns. I've been talking with the administration here because my kids obviously go to school here. They're going to have 500 buses up here, right around the corner, picking up and dropping off all these athletes and taking them to there. It's going to be a logistical craziness, and they want them to be electric. And so, I know we have Nurit here from Office of Sustainability, also on the DWP board. I know, sorry to shout you out, but how are we going to have enough electric power, literally, for all these buses to be charging and taking these athletes back and forth? I don't know if we're going to be able to do it in 3 years. These are huge logistical challenges, just down to the fact that the school is hey, we're going to have to shut down because there's going to be so many buses here on Charles E. Young Drive just lined up. I mean, we have to think about things like that, people's daily lives. So we have a lot of challenges to overcome on this.
I want to
make all the buses electric by 2028.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yes.
And they're doing this incredible thing where you're creating a street that will charge buses as they drive along.
Yeah, that's some of the new technologies that we can gain from. Another topic, and I would like to ask each one of you, does the goal of sustainable mobility interact with the goal of mobility justice? And what I mean by mobility justice is to provide equal accessibility to different population groups, from older adults, younger adults, low-income folks, disabled folks. How does the goal of sustainability interact?
I'll jump in. I'll go
Please.
first this time, just to say, I think by nature it doesn't, and so we have to work on it. By nature, but there's also a certain amount of, I think it's an interesting balance here. But electric vehicles are a good example. They really start at the high end and work down. I don't know that you would have been successful making a low-end car for the masses, but still, it's not making it all the way down. In the U.S., especially, the electric cars started, the Chevy Bolt, the Chevy Spark was even lower end, and now they've decided those aren't profitable enough and moving back up.
Yeah.
So even
China
something
is
like
doing
that.
it. China has very low
Yeah, and
income.
so it's either, I can't tell if there's too much involvement of the government in the market. China's just happening because that's where the market is. I don't know if it's not enough involvement or too much involvement, but it's not happening by itself. Something has to change. And so I think I think in the bus world, we very much managed to start with that. I think economic justice is often one of the top priorities. But the other, when it's new technology, eVTOLs, that's,
Yeah,
if you take Uber Black everywhere,
sometimes we overlook certain goals.
And until a few days ago, economic justice was an important criteria in federal grants. I think that went away on January 20th.
Yep.
So we'll have to see where things go.
Yeah, we just learned just a week ago that US DOT grants will now be decided not on who has the most need for transportation, but who has the highest marriage and birth rates.
Yes.
So Southern Utah, you were getting a lot more money than Los Angeles. But we believe at MoveLA that mobility justice is economic and environmental justice. And we are very concerned about autonomous vehicles. Yes, they are here, but they're not serving South LA, for instance, right? And that is an economic and environmental justice issue. And so we have to rectify those type of things, particularly with new technologies. How do we ensure that you have the same access in Pacific Palisades as you do in Watts, right? And that's a real problem here in Los Angeles. The other thing that people always forget about, and we are the only organization that has an aging and disability advocacy group as part of our coalition. And that's really important because by 2030, 24% of LA's population, I think about, will be older adults, right? And a lot of those folks have disabilities. And in fact, 100% of the people in this room, I guarantee at some point in your life will have a disability. And we should be planning all of our transportation systems to ensure that all of us have fair access to those systems. And we're not doing that. Currently, a lot of these systems were planned by able-bodied cisgender white males, but that is changing. We're seeing a real shift in the way that we're thinking about our transportation systems, but we need to do a lot better. I was actually, going back to my example in Mexico, I was so impressed when I went on the system. Not only was it 100% ADA accessible, they even had on the screens, they had ASL explaining the system. I was like, Mexico City is years ahead of where we are here in Los Angeles. And oh, by the way, that system was built in 18 months, and 85% of its operations is funded by a 7 peso fare on it. It's insane. So yeah, we got to look to places like Mexico City to do better here.
The whole world.
Yeah.
You want to respond? Or
Sure, yeah. No, I mean, I think investing in sustainable mobility, I think it very easily can lead to investing in environmental justice, economic justice, because right now, sustainable mobility, as I said, the number one thing is public transit. Who takes our public transit system now? It is the poorest people in LA. Most people who take public transit do so because they can't afford to have a car in the city. That's where we start from, right? So investing in the system that the poorest folks here in LA are using is investing in our working community. So investing
100%.
in sustainable mobility is also a way of improving air quality. We have the worst air quality in the country here in LA County. Obviously, we all went through these fires and we all thought about air quality and what it's like when you know that you and your kids are breathing in air that may be harmful. Some communities like those around the 710, where they're breathing in diesel emissions from trucks coming in and out of the port, that they live with that reality all the time, not just after a wildfire. So investing in sustainable mobility, in that case, whether it's the shift to public transit or the shift to zero emission trucks, zero emission cars, has real environmental justice benefits, health benefits as well.
And we should not forget that a majority of our riders are also immigrants. And one of the other criteria now for federal funding from the infrastructure, from USDOT, is enforcement of immigration law on transit systems. That's going to be devastating for systems like ours. So we really have to not only protect our immigrant communities, but we also have to be protecting our LGBTQIA communities as well, and ensure that they feel safe and that they are taken care of while on our transit systems. That's how we build ridership, is making sure that everyone feels comfortable and safe and gets to their destination in a reasonable amount of time on our transit system.
He still has some cards left.
We have a number of questions. We have a number of questions, and I would like to read, because they're all good questions. So one that relates to what we have been discussing about lower-income individuals. How does the panel address the trend of lower-income individuals having to travel further and rely more on public transportation?
Who asked that question? You did? You get the card. That actually is that's a real estate question, right? I mean, we started investing in more public transportation, and then we brought in, real estate saw an opportunity for development, and we saw a lot of displacement, and the very riders that we're building the system for are now being displaced. So we actually have to address the real estate issue.
Yeah, and it's just so there's so many aspects of that. I don't even know where to start. Yeah.
For Jeral, there is a question: what is the fastest way to get Swyft cities built in LA? What are the roadblocks and red tape that need to be cut? What can be done in 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. You've got. I start with the negative, a project management mentality. Let's start with all the obstacles. CEQA, there are exemptions. As long as we're serving and feeding into mass transit, which is where I'd like to be, you have CEQA exemptions for that. Our fastest projects are 2027, including one in the greater LA area, so it's on the timeline, so it's possible. Awesome. I would stay away from the coast. I would stay away from Coastal Commission. And I would be working in as much of a greenfield environment as possible, not having to move utilities, not in crowded streets. I think it's a project management problem. It's a how much is a political problem? You want to minimize the political challenge as much as possible, and try to find a place that's a nice, acceptable place to try something new. I think there's a lot of places I wouldn't want to do this, but.
Well, here's my market tip for you.
Thank you.
There are more people now that live east of the 5 freeway in California, according to the most recent census, than west of the 5 freeway. So there's actually a bigger need for mobility options where it's also harder to build, big rail because it is more spread out. East of the 5 freeway, there's 20 million people living east of the 5 freeway. And now it's 40% of LA County, but you think of communities like Fresno, Bakersfield, the Inland Empire, there's plenty of opportunities. So.
One question for Heather: how do we make public transportation cool in Los Angeles?
I'm not the right person to ask. I mean,
okay, Eli then.
No. I would say someone said, who said music? Okay,
Yes.
Eli, give a card.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I mean, I think that there are a lot of things like this where, where we can partner to bring programming and to bring, we are the entertainment capital of the world. We have so much talent here. Art. I think bringing elements of the creative, energy that we have here in our city into the system, I think is a great idea.
And one of the things that you see all over the world, and it also relates to safety and security, is that I think it's a missed opportunity that all over the world in a lot of transit stations, you have restaurants, you have shops, you have a lot of. And every time I remember once I was at the Union Station, I was walking down 7th, not Union Station, the station on Figueroa and 7th, and I heard it was relatively late, people running behind me. I see who is coming, I was only myself, nobody else. If you are in any place of the world, you have open stores, other 100%. People coming in and out. We don't have that.
Yeah, when you have a proprietor who is in a station that might be empty, they really have basically the incentive to keep it clean and keep it safe because it's better for business, right? So encouraging that is really smart. I think what we need to do is get Kendrick Lamar on transit in Los Angeles, right? No, but seriously, I think those are going to be great solutions. Is activating those stations and making them places where people want to gather. We started something. We launched it last year with Metro called SoCal Transit Week. We're going to do it again. Check it out on our website, SoCalTransitWeek.org, I think, .com. But we did something. We just went out and said to our members, hey, come up with cool ideas for events to do. We had a bunch of UCLA students take the 720 to go work out in West Hollywood, and they got a free class in West Hollywood. But they all went together and had a great time on the train. So if we can create these communities around common interests, but do it on transit, we can start to make it cool again.
And someone out there, if you didn't hear Sit yelled at the beginning, just write it.
Yeah,
and that's I will write it like this. And boy, the apparently white cis male, you would be like, what's this guy doing dressed like this on the bus? I get looks, but you just have to normalize
Our
it.
first day was ride in style with transit. So I wore a tuxedo on it and rode with the West Hollywood mayor. And it was like, yeah, business people need to get to work too, and they need to wear a suit. So yeah.
I also, we've been talking to an app developer based in Canada that's looking at, you can ride and the app records your movement and the distance you're traveling by public transit. And if you have chosen not to drive a car, they have a way of using the carbon marketplace to be able to monetize your ride and to put money in like a little wallet. You could imagine partnerships with big companies so that you could double the amount of money if you now spend it at this company, and then this company could take credit for it in their ESG plan if we're still doing this.
A number of creative ideas for cool.
For a lot of cool ideas.
How do we increase shade as part of public transportation in LA? Shade, I guess, bus stops.
We are talking, we actually work on that as well. We have shout out to my colleague Jordan, who's in the back. We're working on heat and extreme heat right now. Obviously trees are the best way, but we also, we don't have bus shelters at a lot of our bus stops. These are all partnerships with cities. And so for us, it's about working with cities. We've identified our top bus stops that intersect vulnerability to extreme heat with high ridership, with the locations that lack any kind of shade infrastructure. Yeah. And we're trying to work with cities to get funding and to get those bus stops covered in some way. But in my opinion, trees are really the best way. We should always be planting many more trees.
I love that question. Who asked it, by the way? All right. You again. Oh, man. Okay, you get double. Shout out to the Lewis Center. Anyone here from the UCLA Lewis Center? We did a research.
Affiliated.
Yeah, affiliated. We did a research with UCLA Lewis Center. We tried to identify how many of the 10,000 bus stops in LA County had bus shelters. Do you know how many have bus shelters? Oh, up there?
Oh, no, I do.
You don't? It's 5. Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's 24%. And there's huge disparities. Guess how many are in Beverly Hills? 1.
Oh.
It's grandfathered in because it was one of the old streetcars. Now, Bell, on the other hand, has 90% of its bus shelters covered, or bus stops covered. And you think about that, transportation is, you have to get from point A to point B, so you need bus shelters both in Beverly Hills and in Bell, right? Because the person traveling from Bell to Beverly Hills also needs to get back, right? And so it's a two-way thing. So we're trying to flip that. We're trying to move to 75% of bus stops with shelters. Majority are in the city of Los Angeles. We have this new program called STAP that's supposed to do that. You're supposed to start seeing a lot more of those get rolled out, but we're really excited. And it all got kicked off, honestly, the UCLA study was transformative in the way we were able to do the advocacy work. So shout out to UCLA to being really amazing at being able to enable that type of stuff.
Go Bruins. And
go Bruins.
With this, we're at 2:00. We have a few more very interesting. Thank you all for your questions. I tried to ask those that came first. And I think we have to empty the room. But I want to thank our panelists very much for letting us know all this great information. Thank you all for coming.